Thanks so much for finding us here at the Morning Glory Project. I'm your host, Betsy Graziani Fassbender, and my co-producer, Angela Washington, and I are ever so proud and honored to bring the stories of amazing people to you. These are survivors, thrivers, innovators, and trailblazers who tell us not just their stories, but how they got through whatever they got through to get to where they are. We hope you find them as inspiring as we do. Thanks so much for listening and for giving us the honor of your time. It is my wonderful pleasure to welcome to the Morning Glory Project, Cara Brown. Cara is an award-winning watercolor artist and teacher, though she came about this path quite unexpectedly. When she was 24, her first husband proposed marriage in front of a group of friends, always a risky thing in my opinion. She didn't say yes or no. What she said was, "I want kids." She had always yearned for the whole experience available to people in female bodies, becoming a mother, including pregnancy and giving birth. When life circumstances deemed that not possible, she went into a dark time, wondering how her life could be fulfilling, how it could have meaning, given this crushing disappointment. She prayed for the energy to pursue adoption or be given something else. Within a few years, it became obvious that that something else would be her journey as a watercolorist. She was asked by a friend to show her art for the first time in 2007, and in 2011, she led her first groups of watercolor student artists. In the years since, these two aspects of her life have evolved, grown, and flourished. She almost stumbled upon a rich and fulfilling life of art making and providing instruction and supportive environments in which people expand and learn. Living life in full color, in all of the literal and metaphorical meanings of that phrase, is Cara's mission for herself, for her art, and for all of us. You can find out more about Cara and see her extraordinary art at lifeinfullcolor.com, and you can find her podcast about art and life, Watercolor Conversations, wherever you find your favorite podcasts. Cara Brown, thank you so much for being here today.
Oh my gosh, it is my complete honor and joy. I'm so glad.
So, full disclosure, I met Cara in person about 10 months ago. I was thinking about this the other day, about 10 months ago. And I had been working with a previous guest on the Morning Glory Project for my own development as a visual artist, Nikki Trakos, who teaches online. And I was craving an in-person teacher too to supplement what Nikki had begun to teach me. And lo and behold, Open Studios in Marin County, where Cara and I both live, led me to her studio. And she has since become my watercolor mentor, inspirer, and teacher. So I didn't bring her on here today. I didn't bring you, Cara, on here today to just talk about the facts of watercolor. You and I can talk about that for 1,000 years. I love it. But there's something more underneath this experience, and that this is more than making pretty pictures for you. This is something deeply meaningful and deeply spiritual, and whatever someone's medium might be, I think that you have insight into how art and art exploration can be part of that experience. So tell me, you say that it was life circumstances deemed it not possible for you becoming a mother. I know a bit about the story, but can you let our listeners know a bit about that story?
Sure. My first husband, he did agree to have kids. And about 4 years later, it took us, we were still in our 20s, to start thinking about seeing whether or not we could start a family. And after a couple of years of not preventing that from happening, I wasn't pregnant. And so we went and had tests, and we discovered that there was no way we were going to have a family. And the aftermath of that was the emotional turmoil that broke our marriage apart. It was not a great marriage to start with. I wasn't in complete awareness of that. I was in denial, and we ended up divorcing, and I moved back to Marin, and knew I'd be married again. I just knew it in my bones. It's just kind of the way of life that suits the person that I am. And then I met Joe Greenwood, who is now, we've been together more than 25 years, the real love of my life, as we like to say to each other. And 6 days after our first date, he was diagnosed with lymphoma. And 1 week later, a cancerous tumor was removed. And a week after that, we met with the oncologist, and they said, you need to go to a sperm bank because we are going to sterilize you. You're young and healthy, and you have a very aggressive cancer, and we're going to clobber you with chemotherapy, and that's going to take away that aspect of your body.
And this is, your relationship with him is just beginning.
Weeks old.
Weeks old. And still, Cara, I've heard you say that before, and I think given your deep, deep, deep desire and knowledge that you wanted to be a mother and the already disappointment you'd had because of the infidelity in your first marriage, I wonder if there was part of you that felt like cutting and running.
Never. There was some powerful connection between that man and I that started, almost at the beginning.
Wow.
Just a few days after our first date was his CAT scan and then surgery. And so it was, you're my person, and I was his, and there wasn't ever a doubt. I mean, that's not true. There was certainly a brief moment, but just to be like the person I am, it was completely erased by one amazing kiss. He's a foot taller than I was, and he took me by the hand and out the French doors of my little house in San Anselmo, and it was a full moon, and this kiss that he gave me with a bandage on his neck from having had a cancerous lymph node removed earlier that day, and I, as Eve Ensler says, lost all of my decision-making abilities.
I think of that song, it's in his kiss, right?
Yes.
And my guess is it's because not only just because Joe's a good kisser, not that I would know, but not just that, but that all of the meaning behind that and all of the deep connection that you recognized in that moment was just undeniable, it seems.
It was. It was this message. This man is going to be going through this, and this connection that I feel with him is going to be unavailable to me on the other side of it. And so very shortly after that, we went over to Berkeley because that's where you had to go, to the sperm bank, because we were young, fresh lovers, and why wouldn't I help him?
So you were the technical assistant. So to speak. Yeah, that's a lot more fun. I often wonder why they don't do it that way in loving couples.
So then it took me 2 years to want to open that, their fertility and fertility box. And by now I'm 40 and ovaries are slowing down. And so we did a full round of in vitro with, one egg was implanted in me, and then we did one more round of the stimulation drugs that I was injecting myself with and trying to get my ovaries to pop out eggs at will, and my ovary only made one egg that cycle, and they said it's not worth going for it. So we had decided that the end of our genetic material was the end of the road, so that we didn't have the whole fertility thing take over our lives. And then I'm 41, he's 45, and adoption felt like this whole other odyssey. And I'd heard all kinds of really tough stories that wrenched at me because I still wasn't over that I was never going to have kids. I was never going to physically give birth, which was part of what I wanted. So I just let all those horror stories scare me away from adopting. And we looked at each other and agreed that if life was going to present us with a child or children, for circumstances we could not imagine, who needed raising, who needed love and a home, that we would say yes. But otherwise we would do something else with our lives. And I had no idea at that time that it was art.
There's two things I want to pursue there. Certainly there are people that have adopted quite happily and beautifully. And something about it wasn't right for you.
Right.
And I'm pro-choice in all of those ways that people get to choose what's right for them. And like you said, you were open to the possibility, and that didn't happen. So that was the choice. I mentioned in the bio that I introduced you with that was followed then, once that realization that I'm never going to give birth to babies realization happened, you entered a really dark period of trying to imagine. Tell me about that. Tell me what that experience was like, that darkness.
It's really interesting. Sometimes it's really easy to talk about this without the emotion coming up. And sometimes, like now, there it is.
There it is.
There it is. I'm not a person, fortunately, gratefully prone to depression. So it's not like anything I'd ever experienced before. Just give me a second. And I'm fine if this needs to not be part of the final.
We're not taking this out. This is the real moment. This is how it is, Cara, for people. And I want to welcome your authentic experience of this, because I asked you to remember the darkness, and what I think is true of you as a human that I've discovered in our limited though deep acquaintance, and true about you as an artist, is that your deep is very under the skin. Your deepness, your depth is the better word, your access to that is so ready. And that's why I wanted to talk with you, because I think that the tears don't scare me. They make me love you more. So let's not worry about that.
Okay.
So tell me though about what that period of time.
So at the time I was working for Charles Schwab in San Francisco on contract as an information architect, doing the commute from Marin to San Francisco and sitting in meetings that felt tedious and pointless. And I just thought, what is this life? What is this life? I mean, what a part of this is worthwhile? I couldn't find it, And I remember going in to have my thyroid checked because I had no energy. It was like I was just like flattened, and my thyroid was it just was like under this weight of meaninglessness
and sorrow. It occurs to me as you talk that a lot of people use the word depression in appropriate and inappropriate ways. It just sounds like you were just really sad.
I was.
And appropriate, that sadness was the right feeling for that. And also then it made you, like you said, examine the meaninglessness to you of that particular avenue of professional work that you were in. You majored in computer technologies, didn't you? Or
I have a computer science degree, and I've always been kind of a bridge in a lot of ways in life, in various ways. And where I was as an information architect is I could speak tech, and I could also be with the people who didn't speak tech. So I could.
You're the one that you want to reach on the help desk. You're the one I want to reach on the help desk.
I give great help desk.
So here you are, earning a living, doing well in your profession, I'm sure, with great review, and at the same time then coming to this junction. And how is it that you discovered this artistic part of you? Because you don't describe yourself as one of those children that longed to be an artist.
No.
Or whatever. Tell me a little bit about that, about you as a kid, and then how you found watercolor.
So, I like to make, kid art. There's evidence of it. My mom saved all of our stuff, and all the way back to fingerprinting. But my finger painting. My finger paints were definitely full of big color. I have always loved color. There's definitely been that in there. But the fact that I excelled at math and science and language, those are my things I loved in high school. And I wasn't sure what to major in college and took a bunch of math and science classes and ended up in the math department with this computer science degree. And it just like, I was telling someone just this last week that I'm a bit of a freak, as we all are. And part of my freakness is when I was a sophomore in high school, I loved to prove geometric theorems so much I asked the teacher for more of them. They're like puzzles. Like, oh, I love doing this. Prove a geometric theorem. It's just how this brain works.
Well, so you have this, and I don't think they're mutually exclusive at all. Having a math science kind of brain and an art brain. I mean, there are lots of artists that have both of those qualities, but I think that more often we tend to go one route or t'other, right? We
Right.
tend to split that.
So my mom and I, somewhere in my late 20s, early 30s, I was still my first marriage, discovered this love of watercolor paintings, but other people's paintings. They would go to art shows, and there used to be a street festival in downtown San Anselmo every summer. I don't know if you remember, that was a great one. It was really high quality back in those days in the 90s.
Right.
And I took a class at my old high school in San Anselmo, paint flowers and watercolor, and I dabbled with it a little bit. And my mom took off. She got a private teacher, and she painted a big, huge, like 20 by 30 inch painting a month for, a good decade. And anyway, but because of the situation with what I was going through and the rest of my life, my personal life, it wasn't conducive to me to really plunge into it. And so it wasn't until Joe and I were married, and I was back and we were living in his little house in Petaluma right after we got married, that I really picked it up again. And I took a color class at Santa Rosa Junior College, the Petaluma campus, and on color, of course it was color. And it just, it just kind of started burbling again, but very much as a hobby. But the hobby kept kind of growing. So by the time I was leaving my job at Schwab, and for 3 years I worked as a real estate agent. I got licensed and worked with my mother. She's I don't know, been in the business 45 years or something. And so I was working with her in her brokerage, and it was giving me the space in my life to really start painting bigger and more adventurously. And it was actually my last real estate client. It was a woman I used to go to church with, who asked me to do Marin Open Studios in 2007. And I had, just a handful, fewer than 10, what I would call finished paintings. I had to get them framed. And so I say this all the time. I say to her, that means I have to sell my paintings, right? Because you might know this, like you may not be ready for your paintings to go yet. You spend so much time with them, right, in the beginning.
Well, it's very interesting that you say exactly this, because I've just begun painting things that feel fit to give to somebody, and I've had people offer to buy things, and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, but I spent so much time with that. It's like I don't know. It's a project that doesn't quite leave you. So my work is beginning to get, quote, good enough, right, that somebody might recognize it as valuable. And I think all the work is valuable, even what isn't valued by other people. So I'm not saying that. But there's something about this word talent that bugs me, because it sounds as though it's just a gift you got and you just popped out of the womb with it, and ta-da, you make these gorgeous paintings. And this is years of developing it. It seems to me that what you had really was the desire.
Well, that is the old French version of the definition of talent. It's the will, the inclination, and the desire. That's what talent meant a long time ago in French.
And then it's the time. the hours put in the practice,
yes,
and the
but you
learning.
need the will and the inclination and the desire in order to put in the time, right?
Exactly.
So there's I don't know, Elizabeth Gilbert has all kinds of interesting things to say about genius too. So these things live in the same neighborhood to me. They have to do with something deep in us, and then but they're yet to be realized, as we were just talking the other day about this painting that Jan was doing, someone in a group we were with this past weekend, where the dog's nose and eyes were already peeking through this veil. Like the painting exists in some other dimension, and as we paint it, it reveals itself to us.
I described it as it was appearing through the fog.
Yes, I think that our work, our real work, does the same thing, as a body of work. Our
Mm.
capacities, like there might be a painting that, like, I remember one that in my world is called Paris Roses, and he painted it in 2005, so before I ever showed my work. And my dad was he was an artist and an art teacher. He taught ceramics for many years and was a painter at one point in time, and he had an eye, and he said, "Oh, honey, you've got something here. There's something here." So it was, but it was that painting that revealed it, and whereas the one before it happened.
Mm.
So it can happen like that, but who knew? It's funny how these things are. I think the rest of the world sees our work in a way that we can't, uh, at least not for at least a time. I just picked up a painting from the framer on my way here, and it's like, oh, okay. I kind of starting to see how everybody else is liking this painting the way they are. Because when I took it off to them, it was like, oh God, all those little flaws. It's the sort of the obligation of the creator to have this knowing of. Not the obligation, that's not the right word, but it's sort of the side effect. We can't help but know all the places that we would want to revisit.
Well, that inner critic serves a purpose. It keeps us striving for the desired outcome.
Yeah.
We just have to also then tell it to hush up when it's getting out of range. So ask it what its purpose is. So I want to come back to the first part of our conversation, Cara, that and you have said to me, and the reason I wanted to have you talk here is that the struggle of and ultimately not having children has not been, quote, replaced. Like, ta-da, I make art and therefore I'm not unhappy about not having babies. It's not that. I know it's not that for you because of that quickness of that pain and how easily it comes out. But can you tell me about what you see as the relationship between not having children and your being the artist that you are?
Yes, there's actually sort of two aspects to this. And one of them is, like, when I'm in that place of pain, it so feels like the booby prize. I mean, what it's like to give birth and and also to have a child that you didn't give birth to, but be your child. And
Right.
even though I don't know it, like, in my experience, I get it.
Right.
That is powerful. But that desire in me to have that, coupled with the fact that it wasn't to be, is a force, I believe, in our lives. And some people need to get kind of, philosophical about it, call it affirming, denying. And then having another thing arise of it is a reconciling force. And that reconciling of my desire to have children and that to not be, that resulted in this terrible grief and disappointment. It was my intention all along, even if I wasn't conscious of it, to make something of this, to not be living in that place all of my life. But had I had kids, who knows? I just know that it was such a big force, the tension between those two things, that it propelled me in a way. Maybe I wouldn't be making art at all. Maybe it wouldn't be at this caliber. I would have now a 20-year-old. So who knows? But I have to believe that I wouldn't have had the fullness that it does now if I had been raising a child along the way. I just know that I wouldn't have become a mother at 41 and pursued my dream of, what I didn't even know was my dream. Eleanor asked me to do open studios, and then I was asked over and over and over again to teach. And those two things were like, okay, that's why I say it was unexpected. I didn't seek this out.
Well, it's also no accident. It strikes me as no accident that a lot of the students that I've met in your studio and when I'm so fortunate to be there painting with others in a community of newbie and experienced artists, many of them are mothers. But they often come to the art, as I did later in life, when they don't have the responsibility of little ones at their heels. And so, who knows what the timing might have been with you, but it doesn't strike me as, it strikes me as wise that you're looking at it that way. You're saying, I recognize that I likely, children would have occupied time, space, energy, money, all of those things, that the resources, emotional, physical, psychological, spiritual resources go into raising children, and not having them let you find this expression earlier than maybe you might have. Perhaps you would be coming upon it only now when you have a 20-year-old, as opposed to 25 years ago when you didn't get to have children. Who knows?
Yeah.
We'll never know what the path not taken was. So, Cara, I'm looking at time, and you and I can chat forever, and we will. But for the sake of this conversation, one of the questions that I ask people is, how did you get through what you got through? And it seems to me that your art, and I must say, let me describe for folks what they can't see in this audio podcast, but what they could see on your site, Life in Full Color. Your art is floral and beautiful, and big pieces of art. We're not talking about, little pocket-sized watercolors. We're talking about, 2 by 3 feet kinds of, or 2 feet by 3 feet by 3 feet, whatever the dimensions are. And they're so expressive and mesmerizing. And I love your art, of course, but I'm wondering for you if the art itself is also therapeutic to you. Not just that it's a baby replacement, because it's not. It could never be that, and you don't talk about it that way. But I'm wondering if it's a therapy, a healing process for you. I don't know. I haven't heard you talk about it that way.
The how I got through, it probably was relationships. I mean, I remember there was a pastor at the church, Sarah Vurick. I used to go to the Fairfax Community Church, and she was our pastor. And I can remember one tearful sobbing session. She's just got this enveloping hug. And, so, I mean, I like having people like Sarah in my life who could hold my grief was huge. Mm-hmm. And it's not a lost on me that this is where the same church community where my art was first shown into the world. And that was really helpful, being in a strong marriage, like that's what got me through. But what has me know I'm okay and I'm good now, as I have people in my life are starting to think about like having grandchildren like it just like there's the levels of, oh, not that. They're forever.
It's still painful. Well, and I think people think of grief as something that goes away, and sometimes it's something. It's not something you get over. It's something you live with. It's something you live with.
Well, I mean, I look around where I am. I'm in my studio now, and there's these things that I've painted all over the walls, and it's like, really?
Me?
Look at that. Yeah. and that I'm even in this studio, and that I have these people in my life who come and contribute to me financially so that this can exist. It's just, I mean, my name is on the wall outside, That's the unexpectedness of this. Like, wow, look what happened, on the other side of not having like this space in my life, it was filled. So I think it was a certain amount of, like, I knew I was going to be married again. I knew there would be something that would come. I didn't know it was this, but, I did. And in some place in me, I don't know if in my darkest moments I did, but I'm a pretty optimistic person. I'm definitely a glass half full kind of orientation on life. And so I've come to understand that, I'm a more recent student of the evolution of human consciousness and culture. And one of the things that the people who are in this world talk about is how humanity has always, with lots of setbacks and lots of evidence to the contrary, always headed towards greater beauty, truth, and goodness. Mm. And that grounds me. That so grounds me. That faith in that's where we're going. And, I signed up on the beauty side, but there's all kinds of goodness. And I also think a certain amount of truth in this life that is showing up around me, like what's really true, like truly good, there's that. Mm-hmm. So I don't know. I think what got me through is people. And then this one, I didn't even know it, but this foundational faith in goodness, the goodness of life.
Mm. Well, beauty, truth, and goodness. My goodness. Cara Brown, thank you for that. I'm going to be thinking about that a lot. I think that in troubling times, it's hard to remember that or hard to believe it. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to take that and swallow it whole. And thank you so much for your time, for your heart, for sharing this with my listeners, but mostly for my good fortune and for you sharing it with me. Thank you.
Well, thank you for inviting me. There's no deeper, greater, more affirming thing for a human being to experience, I think, than to be seen and to be wanted to reveal, for someone wanting them to reveal themselves. And you do that for me all the time and never more than today. So thank you so much for sharing me with your world. I'm honored and moved.
Thank you. Thank you. It's been a couple of days since I recorded my conversation with Cara, and a couple of things stand out in my thoughts today. One is that the title of her business, and indeed what I titled this episode, is Life in Full Color. And that word full is what's important there. Of course, she's a watercolorist, and so there are those obvious literal references. But I know Cara well enough to know that she means more than just the paint on the page. That what she's talking about is living all of life's colors, the brights and the darks, the sunlights and the shadow, the clear and the murky. And that all of those are the elements that go into a beautiful painting, but also into a beautiful, full life. That there are shadows in all of our lives. In hers, the one that she talked about today, is that something she wanted with her whole self, wanted to become a mother, that didn't happen. And that is a darkness in her story that will always be a source of sadness that no amount of paintings could replace, but that lives alongside the beauty of her art, that lives alongside the joy of the life that she's built in the absence of children. The day that I was recording my conversation with Cara, that very day, during that recording, I was keeping my eye on my phone a little bit. I was cheating just a bit, because I was awaiting the arrival of my first grandchild, who was born that very evening. And I realized that sometimes when I have something wonderful in my life, and I have a friend who doesn't have that thing, that I feel awkward talking about it. I couldn't not share the joy of the arrival of this new grandbaby. Of course, I'm delighted, but I'm aware that it's something my friend does not have. Cara doesn't ask any of her art students or friends not to share their lives about their children. Of course, she welcomes that, but I know that it remains a source of sorrow for her. So I share those things with sensitivity and without guilt. To feel guilty for having joy in your life is to misplace guilt. Guilt is a perfectly useful thing. It should be applied when you do something awful, when you are unkind or you act out of your own ethical practice. Feel guilty. It gets you to change. That's a good thing. But when you're simply experiencing a joyful thing, if you are compassionate and sensitive in sharing that with somebody who perhaps isn't able to have had the same thing, no reason to feel guilty. Just be kind. Just be aware. Just be sensitive. That's a lot of extra blooms for today. So I thank you so much for listening to the Morning Glory Project, and hope that wherever you are, that you are living your life in full color, with its brights and its darks, its shadows and its sunlight, and that lets you bloom.